And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this will probably be my final video talking about Ravnica Murders at Karlov Manor. I think there is a possibility I make a deck from that set, not sure yet, but likely this is going to be the last video where I'm talking about the cards, and there's a bunch of cards I wanted to talk about here. I already did what I considered to be the best Commander cards, the cards that are certainly going to get played a ton in the Commander format, and I already did a video about the Commanders, and this video is sort of going to be the leftovers a little bit. It's going to be the cards that certainly will see play in the Commander format, but they're a lot more niche. They're not going to be super popular, but they are going to get played. There are just some really neat cards here that I like personally myself that I wanted to talk about. So certainly there's going to be a lot of neat cards in this video that are worth consideration for a lot of your decks. So let's take a look. And I want to start out with Follow the Bodies. And when this card got spoiled, it brought a tear to my eye, maybe, or it certainly brought a smile to my face because it's something that I've been asking for quite a long while. I believe the video I made about reprinting old abilities that needed reprinted, I did about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. And I didn't think it would ever happen, and it finally happened. So 2 and a blue sorcery has Gravestorm, and if you've never seen Gravestorm before, it's because it only appears on one other card in the history of Magic, which is Bitter Ordeal, and it is an ability, a mechanic that I've been asking to be reprinted for a while. It essentially works like Storm, except with going to your grave. And Bitter Ordeal, funny enough, is a card that does see play in the Commander format, originally from Future Sight. One of the most interesting sets out there that the whole idea was they were going to print all these really interesting mechanics and stuff that they would maybe revisit in the future. And a lot of those mechanics they did revisit. Some of them I'm still waiting on them to revisit. Finally, they got back to using Gravestorm. And funny enough, I just lost the game to Bitter Ordeal the other day. There is some combo potential there because if you can get infinite, dice triggers or something like that, just anything going to the graveyard, that gives me infinite Gravestorm triggers, and I can use my Bitter Ordeal because of course it copies however many times I want and just exile all my opponent's libraries, right? So can you do the same with Follow the Bodies? Well, you can get the infinite Gravestorm triggers if you want infinite clue tokens, because that's all it does, right? All it does is 3 mana investigate, but with the Gravestorm, which I guess I should clarify means whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each permanent put into graveyard from the battlefield this turn. So if you've had that happen a bunch with the clue tokens is very much possible because this does include tokens as well. How much you're going to want to be doing this, I don't know. I will also point out, again, Gravestorm in itself is just a very unique ability. So even though Investigate might not be great, the fact that Gravestorm is printed on another card here is very significant. Magecraft is another ability that, if you have an Archmage Immeratus in play and I can get a whole bunch of Gravestorm's triggers, I don't really care about the Investigate because I'm going to draw a ton of cards off of my Archmage Immeratus, right? So just the Gravestorm ability alone, in my opinion, is the significant part about this card, and I'm just really happy to see that they actually brought this mechanic back, even though it is only on one card. Let's talk about a very interesting card here, Expedited Inheritance. Red and a red enchantment. Whenever a creature is dealt damage, any creature is dealt damage, its controller may exile that many cards from the top of their library, and they may play those cards until the end of their next turn. Wow. So first of all, I love this card because they don't really do this anymore. And it really bothers me that they don't do this anymore, which is just these universal effects that just affect everybody. It's a card that has a very powerful effect, but because it affects everybody, it makes it so that it is not nearly as powerful as it normally would be if it was just you. If this card was just whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, that would be really, really good, right? It would be absurd. But because your opponents get to use it too, it makes it less good. I like cards like that, these universal effects that you're trying to break symmetry. Now, where exactly do you play this? Obviously, you want to play it like you would do to break any universal effect. You advantage it to yourself, and the best way to advantage this to yourself is to play it in an exile tribal deck where you either want things to be exiled from your library or you want to be playing stuff from exile, which we do have a bunch of commanders like that now. For sure. Is this just good enough to throw in any deck? Because whenever one of your creatures is dealt damage, it's pretty good card advantage. I will point out that it is a may, so you don't have to worry about, if you don't want to exile your whole library because someone just cast a Blasphemous Act. You just don't have to do it, right? The best fit for this card is in one of my favorite commanders from last year, Rocco, which is a commander that, of course, wants everyone to be playing stuff from exile. So slam dunk there. Not that there's already enough slam dunks in that deck. There are certainly some decks where it's a slam dunk, but all around a pretty interesting card. A card that has certainly gotten some buzz is Conspiracy Unraveler, 5 blue, Sphinx Detective, 6/6 with flying, so a 7-mana creature. That's a lot, but you're getting a lot for it. You may collect evidence 10 rather than pay the mana cost for spells you cast. That is it. This can make all your spells free. Now, collect evidence 10 means you have to exile cards with total mana value 10 or greater from your graveyard. How hard is this going to be? This ability, I think, has been a little tough to evaluate. We really got to see it in action. Is it going to be that easy? You know, can I slam this guy down and it becomes an omniscience where now I can just start exiling stuff from my graveyard to cast stuff for free? I mean, it's possible you have one card in your graveyard that costs 10 mana. That is an easy swap out, right? This collect evidence, funny enough, is a lot like Delve, and this ability in particular is a lot like Delve. Kind of funny, actually. A lot of the mechanics from this set are just redos of old mechanics, but I digress. It certainly has a powerful effect here, and obviously there's going to be some people getting into some shenanigans where I just mill my whole library and then I go nuts. I mean, I'll paint a picture here just off the top of my head. I have a Muldrotha deck, say for example, where I can cast stuff from my graveyard. Any scenario where you can cast stuff from your graveyard, I mill my entire library and then 1 mana reanimate this guy out of my graveyard. There's lots of ways to do that, right? Dread Return is another way that you could probably do it. Get this guy into play and then I just start going to town. And in fact, there might even be some really busted scenarios that people could end up getting into, right? There might be some commanders where this is an absolute slam dunk. It's definitely going to see play. Let's talk about another big, scary, flying, expensive creature that's definitely going to see play in the format and is also using the collect evidence mechanic, Incinerator of the Guilty, 4 red, dragon, 6/6 flying and trample. So already it's likely this could see play in Dragon Tribal decks, which is, geez, might be the most popular tribe in the format. Whenever Incinerator of the Guilty deals combat damage to a player, you may collect evidence X. When you do, Incinerator of the Guilty deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker that player controls. So board wipe stapled on your creature. This is essentially a Balefire Dragon, which of course has been a staple in the format for a long time, except maybe better. Maybe better, maybe worse, depends on who you talk to, I guess. Obviously, it's maybe better because you get to choose how much damage is dealt. You can deal 30 damage to your opponent's entire team if you want to exile that much stuff from your graveyard. I would say if you're in a Dragon Tribal deck, it's likely you're not going to get anything out of your graveyard, I don't think. So this probably would be a great fit, and you have a lot of expensive stuff in your graveyard, those dragons that have died previously, so this guy seems like a pretty good slam dunk in a lot of those decks. All right, Tangle, Trove, Kelp, 5 blue, artifact creature, clue, plant, 6/6. And I have a Denic deck, which, man, if you already had a clue deck before this set came out, I don't know how many clue commanders there were. Lonus was the first, I believe, and then Denic would have been the second. If you are one of the people like myself who has a Denic deck or you have a Lonus deck, there's so much support for those decks in this set. You're just going to have a tough time trying to figure out what to put in there. I mean, I'm already having a hell of a time trying to find room in that deck. There's 3 cards in a row here that are good finishers for that deck that I kind of need it. I kind of need a finish. That's one of the issues I have with that deck is closing out games. And this is a fantastic finisher for that deck or any clue deck. So Ward 2, at the beginning of each combat, other clues you control become 6/6 plant creatures in addition to their other types until end of turn. And of course, because it's a clue, it has the clue ability of pay 2, sacrifice, tangle, trove, kelp, draw a card. So at the beginning of each combat, even on your opponent's turns, all your clues are going to turn into 6/6 creatures. Which of course, I mean, it makes for good blockers as well. Obviously, the big part is, again, trying to close out games. And in my Denic deck, I mean, this might have to be, I'll talk about the other 2 that are also great fits. I can't put them all. I might only be able to fit one of them, and this might be my first choice, mostly because it's very easy for me to create a clue on an opponent's turn. So when I do, assuming it's before combat, now that clue I just created is going to make a really nice blocker because it's going to turn into a 6/6. So that would be the case for making this one the choice for that deck. Obviously, it is going to go in a lot of those decks, But we have more options here. Merchant of Truth is another fantastic option if you're in that Denic deck, or I guess it doesn't fit in the Lotus deck because it's white, but it's going to fit in a lot of these clue decks, and it's a great finisher. 2 white, Angel Detective, 2/5 with flying. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, investigate. So it's giving you more of those clue tokens. I don't find, and man, there's a couple of cards in this set that people would see and go, oh, that's a slam dunk in a Denic deck, right? Like that one that just creates a whole bunch of clue tokens, or maybe Follow the Bodies, which can create a whole bunch of clue tokens. Nope, it appears to be a fantastic fit in my Denic deck, but as I've said many, many times before, the last problem I have in that deck is creating clues. I do it like crazy. I don't need any more. And in fact, this is what happened to me in the very last game that I played, and that's my advice to anyone who already has a clue deck or thinks about making one from this set. The number one issue you're going to have is all the mana you're going to need to crack all those clues. Making clues is not going to be an issue. It's the mana you need to crack them so that you can draw cards or figure out something else to do with them. And this card, even though it is making more clues, which I don't need, it is giving me something to do with those clues, because clues you control have Exalted. And again, that would have been phenomenal in the last game I was playing, because I think I had about 8 clues lying on the battlefield that, again, I just didn't have the mana to crack them all to draw cards. And if I had this in play, now when I attack with my commander, which is a flying creature, it is going to get, I guess, +8/+8 if I have 8 clues just sitting around, because they all have Exalted, as long as that creature attacks alone, right? That's what Exalted does. Is this a better finisher than the other one? I mean, it only costs 4, and it also gives me more clues, which is okay. I don't need it, but it is okay. Which one am I going to put in my deck? I'm not sure. I also could try out Knowledge is Power. I almost mentioned this in my best commander cards, the other video where I mentioned the cards that, you know, everyone's going to be playing, because this is going to see play. I wasn't sure how much. I bumped it over to this video because I was like, it's pretty good, but it's really good in certain scenarios, and I like to keep the more niche cards in this video. So 3 white and a blue enchantment creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn. And I had a patron on the Discord saying, oh, I thought that was a sorcery and it seemed really bad. It's an enchantment. So it's way, way better, obviously, because it's always sticking around, right? Your creatures are going to get this anthem effect however many cards you've drawn this turn. So at the very worst, on your turn, they're going to get +1/+1, which for 5 mana is horrific, but it's very easy to get a lot more. And again, in the clue deck, as a finisher, it's not bad. I can crack a couple clues. Now I've drawn 3 cards this turn. Now all my creatures get +3/+3. That's pretty great, right? That's pretty darn good. I will also point out, you can get into some funny scenarios where maybe it's your opponent's turn. They cast a Toxic Deluge thinking they're going to get all your creatures by paying the appropriate amount of life, and you respond by cracking a couple clues. That's a funny way to use this as well. Mostly though, it is a way to close out a game in a whole lot of decks, like probably control-y decks that maybe have a little bit of problem with that. White-blue decks that maybe you just have a lot of little weenie creatures lying around like I do in my Denic deck, and this is a way to help close out the game. Another option for that deck, I'm not sure which one I'm going to use. Speaking of closing out games, let's talk about Vein Ripper, which is going to be a great way for closing out games if you're in a completely different kind of deck. 3 black, Vampire Assassin, 6/5 with flying. And I will point out again, this is a Vampire Assassin, so very easy slot into any of those tribal decks. Ward, sacrifice a creature. So your opponent will have to sacrifice a creature if they want to target this with anything, which is very relevant because whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this is a Blood Artist on steroids. This is just a bigger, nastier Blood Artist, right? Now it costs 6 mana, of course. It's also a 6/5 flying body. Even if you're just doing a Vampire tribal deck, it's probably a good fit, because whenever a creature dies, I mean, that's like 100 times in every commander game that happens, right? So lots of great life gain, lots of great life loss. Why not? Audience with Trostani. This is a very interesting card. So 2 and a green sorcery. Create an 0/1 green plant creature token. Then draw cards equal to the number of differently named creature tokens you control. What a funny card. Where exactly does this fit? This isn't going to fit very well in any theme where obviously you're just making the same kind of token, like a Saproling deck, right? If I'm playing a Saproling deck, well, I'm only making Saproling tokens. Now, if I create a plant token and then I have a Saproling token, Now I'm drawing 2 cards. For 3 mana is terrible. Obviously, in a green deck, you shouldn't have a problem drawing cards already. You can obviously find better options than that. You want at least 3, right? 3 mana, draw 3 cards is pretty darn good. That's the floor here for this card. How often is it going to be happening? Like, I'm wondering what the deck is. I guess just a generic, like an Adrix and Nev deck. Probably a lot of Adrix and Nev decks are just doing generic tokens, right? Because you need different names here. So that's likely the deck where this is going to see play, I think. Any generic token making deck in green probably would like this card. Let's get back to cards that I will be putting in my decks for sure. So Lost in the Maze. X blue enchantment with flash. When Lost in the Maze enters the battlefield, tap X target creatures. Put a stun counter on each of those creatures you don't control. So already we're in the I'm tapping my opponent's creature. So if you're any of those themes, again, I have my Abishon deck, which is obviously doing that. If you have that Hilda deck, there's a couple tapping commanders in the format now that might want this. You get the stun counter as well, but also tapped creatures you control have hexproof. So this card's great, really. And yeah, it seems pretty niche, but it very easily could be just 2 mana. I flash this in to give my tapped creatures hexproof in response to some removal. I mean, I know a counterspell costs 2 blue mana, but still, it could be 2 mana, I flash this in just because someone's about to swords my commander, which is tapped, and I give it hexproof temporarily. Why it works particularly well in my Abishon deck, though, and why this is going to absolutely be going in there is because I can tap all my creatures in response, right? I have my commander's ability, which taps all non-flying creatures, including mine. I can just, in response, activate my commander's ability and tap all my creatures. I'll tap everyone else's as well, which is pretty good. And then all my creatures now have hexproof. So this is a really neat fit in that deck. I love it a lot. Let's talk about Barbservator. This is a really interesting card. Not sure exactly where it fits, but it is worth talking about for sure. So 3 and a black, artifact creature construct 1/1. Has indestructible. That's pretty good. And there are a limited amount of creatures in the Commander format that have indestructible. When Barbservator enters the battlefield, suspect it. So, new mechanic from this set, which means it has menace and can't be blocked. And this is not like putting a counter on a creature. It just is that. It just is a suspected creature unless you can figure out a way to make it not suspected anymore, which there are a few ways to do it from this set. Are you going to be playing those in your deck as well? Not likely. So it is likely that this card will be suspected for the entire time it's in play, which means it will have menace, but can't block. So you probably are going to be attacking with it every turn, right? When Barbservator deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Another pretty good reason to be attacking with it every turn. And whenever Barbservator is dealt damage, target opponent loses that much life. So again, where does this exactly fit? I don't know. Maybe artifact creature tribal deck in black, but it's just an all-around great creature. I plop it down, it's indestructible. I just attack with it every turn. It's got menace, so my opponent has to block with 2 creatures. It is a 1/1, but whenever it's dealt damage, target opponent loses that much life. So if my opponent blocks with 2 creatures, which they have to, they are then going to deal that much damage to my Barbservator, which, by the way, even though it is indestructible, it still takes damage. It just doesn't die from that damage. Then I just throw that damage around. So they don't want to block it. And if they don't block it, obviously, I get in for damage. I draw a card and I lose a life. So all good. Where exactly does this fit? I don't know, but pretty good commander card. All right, Forensic Gadgeteer, 2 and a blue. Vedelkin, Artificer, Detective. They definitely didn't hold back on the creature types in this set for sure. Like 80% of the creatures from this set have 3 different creature types. So a 2/3, whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate. Okay, well, that's pretty fantastic. But also, activated abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana cost to less than 1 mana. So, I mean, obviously, we know where this is going to go. A lot of people will say, again, hey, perfect for your Denic deck. No chance. I'm putting this in my Denic deck. And I know I just finished complaining about clues costing mana to activate. Having my clues be able to sacrifice for 1 is nice. I don't know if it's enough to warrant putting this in there. Again, for me, the bigger issue is probably closing out games, so I'd rather put one of those other cards in as well. However, outside of my own personal decks, there's obviously a ton of decks that want to be doing this, having their activated abilities of artifacts be 1 less. I mean, even if you just have a generic mono blue artifact deck, this is every time you cast an artifact spell, pay 1 and draw a card, essentially, right? Is what it works out to be. So not too shabby. Moving along, I got a lot of cards to talk about here. Connecting the dots, 1 and a red enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. You can't look at it. So typically when you exile a top card of your library, you get to look at it. So does everyone else, by the way, right? But when you exile it face down, that means you can't look at it unless it says otherwise, but they put in the reminder text to remind everybody that when you exile a top card of your library face down, you can't look at it. Every time a creature you control attacks, if I attack with 5 creatures on my turn, it will trigger 5 times and I will exile 5 cards from the top of my library face down. Pay 1 and a red, discard your hand, sacrifice connecting the dots. Put all cards exiled with connecting the dots into their owner's hand. So I'm going to put the 5 cards that I just exiled into my hand. Got to discard my hand, but I'm probably not going to use this if I already have a lot of cards in hand. This is a really good card draw option, in my opinion, for red, which doesn't do it very well. It is, again, this is another card that I had considered for best cards from the set. I bumped it down to here because I thought it was a little more niche, where if you're not attacking a lot, it's not great. But if you're attacking a lot, it's fantastic. Like the scenario I just said. If I have no cards in hand, but I got 5 creatures in play, okay, I'll just attack with my 5 creatures. I don't really care if they die or not. And then exile the top 5 cards of my library and then pay 2 mana and put them into my hand, right? And the more creatures you have in play, the more out of hand this gets. And this is not impulse draw. And one of the issues I had, and this is why I might be putting this in my Browlin deck, one of the issues I have in my Browlin deck with impulse draw, where I don't like it there, is it doesn't go to my hand. So obviously I'm in a discard theme. You can't discard from exile. You can only discard from your hand. This is an option where it's actually putting those cards into my hand where I want them. So this is likely a card that I will be putting in my Browlin deck for that reason, and taking out some other option that's not so great. Also because it's discarding my hand, it fits the discard theme. Moving on, Undercity Eliminator. 3 black, Gorgon Assassin 3/3. When Undercity Eliminator enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice an artifact or creature. When you do, exile target creature an opponent controls. Well, that's pretty good, right? I mean, it's an ETB creature that exiles other creatures. I mean, you have to sacrifice an artifact or a creature, but okay, you're going to put this in the deck where you want to be doing that. And in fact, it'll work extra good in those synergies where you want to be doing that, in those sacrifice decks, right? This is, I think, the first black creature that is going to actually exile another creature. There are lots of effects that destroy, and of course, exile is so much better. Just a great value-y ETB creature. I always love creatures like this. I love to give them a mention. I don't know if anyone's talking about this card, but I definitely want to bring it up because it is going to fit nicely in a lot of decks, like my Kinzu deck, where it's going to be a fantastic fit because it's just a great ETB creature with a sacrifice trigger. Next up, Cronco's Buzz Crusher. Speaking of creatures with great ETBs, and again, this is another one that I was giving consideration for. Okay, well, this card could just go in any deck, right? But I don't think it's going to be super popular. It certainly is going to see play, though. 2 red, artifact creature, insect, Thopter, 4/4 flying trample. So I will point out it's an artifact, which means you could play it in an artifact theme in red, in the sacrifice artifact theme. And again, because it's got an ETB, getting it back with that Goblin Welder, those kinds of effects could be very relevant. So when Cronco's Buzz Crusher enters the battlefield, for each player, destroy up to 1 non-basic land that player controls. For each land destroyed this way, its controller may search the library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So it is a, Ghost Quarter type of effect where they get to replace it, but you're hitting a non-basic land. As I say all the time, you absolutely need to be able to hit those non-basic lands in any commander deck, and this is a pretty great option. You can get all of your opponents with it. I will also point out, you can hit yourself with this, right? It is destroy up to 1 non-basic land. You don't have to hit yourself. And in fact, you don't have to hit all your opponents either, right? Maybe some of them don't have a non-basic land. Unlikely, but it is a possibility. You could hit yourself with this. There are reasons to do it. Maybe you have a land on the battlefield that you just want to get rid of. Maybe you need to mana fix yourself. Again, just like the Ghost Quarter situation, you can blow up your own lands with a Ghost Quarter to get a color of mana that you need, and you can do the same here because obviously you're searching a library for a basic land card. It also gets a lot of landfall triggers. I will point that out as well. Again, you're Ghost Quartering everyone in play. So whether you want landfall triggers or you want your opponents to all have landfall triggers, you're going to get a lot of landfall triggers this way. A lot of search your library triggers. I mean, there's a lot of neat scenarios here, right? Stranglehold gets a lot better with that. Gets a heck of a lot better with an opposition agent, stuff like that, right? Really neat card for sure. All right, let's talk about Reenact the Crime. 1 blue, blue, blue instant. Exile target non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it. You may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. Oh boy, talk about an open-ended card that could be used in so many different scenarios. I like the 3 blue here, as I talked about in the last video. More colored mana symbols, please. Especially when you have a card that's super open-ended that could go in any commander deck. More colored mana symbols means you're probably not going to play this outside of I mean, mono blue deck for sure, of course. Maybe like a Dimir deck, like maybe a deck where you're milling yourself a lot. This could be good, obviously, because it can be used on you or your opponents. You know, I don't know. You can get into some funny scenarios here, but this could be a card where, okay, I'm just going to hold the mana up and just see what happens, right? My opponent just has their best creature get killed. That is a non-land card put into a graveyard from anywhere this turn, and I'll pay 4 mana and create a token copy of it, essentially, right? Because that's what's going to happen. You're going to exile it. You're going to copy the card in exile and then cast the copy, which if it's a permanent becomes a token, of course. But you can do it to yourself as well, right? You can get into the scenario where I'm just self-milling, and this might be a great card to put in a self-mill strategy where as you're self-milling yourself, and again, of course, milling your opponents as well seems like a pretty good fit. You just watch those cards going into the graveyard, right? Any of those cards that are a non-land card, they were put into the graveyard from anywhere. Now I can copy it. You can even just entomb something, right? That is a card going into your graveyard from anywhere. So this can be, I mean, I guess it would be an expensive reanimation spell in that manner, although good luck reanimating a Omniscience in your Dimir deck, right? That's not going to happen. So, you know, just throwing out some scenarios here, and instant speed, by the way, as well. For 5 mana, I can entomb my Omniscience because that went into a graveyard from anywhere this turn. I can then cast this and get a token copy Omniscience into play, untap on my turn, and just go nuts. It's a really neat card for sure. I don't know where exactly it fits. Again, I think maybe the best fit is in a milling strategy, either yourself or milling your opponents, but all around, just a great card. All right, Relive the Past. This card definitely got some buzz on my Discord, and you know, I looked at it and I was like, it's okay. It certainly is going to see play in the format. 5 green and a white sorcery, so 7 mana. That's a lot. I want a lot for 7 mana in a commander game. Return up to 1 target artifact card, up to 1 target land card, and up to 1 target non-aura enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. They are 5/5 elemental creatures in addition to their other types. That's pretty good. That's about it. It's just pretty good. Even if I got all of these targets, which is not hard, right? It's not hard to get an artifact, a land, and a non-aura enchantment from your graveyard. I don't know if this card fits in any particular theme. I mean, I guess you could do enchantment tribal, but why would you pay 7 mana to get an enchantment out of your graveyard? That seems like a little bit of an overkill, right? I don't know if there's too many self-mill decks in white and green, maybe, but you know, that's the thing. This is a card where, to me, I don't see a particular deck where you could play it. You could play it in any deck. And also, the payoff here is, it's okay. It certainly is good. Yeah, again, maybe I could get an Omniscience out of my graveyard, I guess. Again, there's easier ways to do that. And also, turning them into 5/5 elemental creatures, in my opinion, is maybe more of a downside than an upside. You know, I don't know. If people are seeing that and going, okay, well, I get 15 power on the board right away. Bam. Yeah, that's okay, I guess. But for me, it's maybe more of a downside than an upside. I guess if your Smothering Tithe is a 5/5 creature, you can now attack with it and it's still going to give you the treasures. Okay, but it's also going to die way easier. So all I'm doing is, you know, enchantments are kind of difficult to remove in the commander format. Creatures are one of the easiest things to remove in the commander format. So I'm just making it easier for my opponents to get it off the battlefield now, right? So yeah, I don't know. This card it's okay. It's going to see play in the format. I just don't know where. Really niche, interesting card here, Insidious Roots. I just really wanted to talk about this one. It's pretty interesting. Black and a green enchantment. Creature tokens you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. So I guess, and I can think of a couple of commanders off the top of my head that are black and green that are cranking out tokens. This is probably a slam dunk in those decks. Turns all your creature tokens into mana dorks, which in those decks you likely won't be using them anyway. So just great. Also though, again, whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create an 0/1 green plant creature token, then put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. So obviously, you know, even if you're not doing the token theme, you're just doing that Tormod deck that wants stuff to be coming out of the graveyard, well, you're making zombie tokens with your Tormod, so those are tokens that can now tap for mana. And of course, every time you do it, you are making that O1 plant token. If you're in the Tasigur deck, if you're delving enough, I don't know if you are in that deck or not, I mean, you probably are, you will be getting this trigger and you'll just be creating plants that are going to get +1/+1 counters on them and also tap for mana. Seems like pretty good value there. Seems like it's worth it. It is pretty niche. It's definitely a slam dunk in a couple of decks that I can think of for sure. But where else does it fit? It's a neat card for sure. All right, Slime Against Humanity. I definitely had to talk about this card. It is definitely going to see play in the Commander format for a couple of reasons, but one very specifically. 2 and a green at sorcery. Create a 0/0 green ooze creature token with trample. Put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is 2 plus the total number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard that are oozes or are named Slime Against Humanity. So you're probably going to want to put this in your ooze tribal decks, I imagine, which there's probably a decent amount of those in the format. But the main reason why it's going to see a lot of play in the Commander format is because a deck can have any number of cards named Slime Against Humanity. That's right. This is another one of those cards that is breaking the rules of Commander because you don't have to just put one in your deck. You can put as many as you want. And I just talked about this recently in my 5 unique builds video about persistent petitioners. And, you know, when I'm building a deck like that, the main thing I'm looking at is the same name stuff. There's lots of same name things that you never see in the Commander format for obvious reasons, except in these very specific scenarios. And yes, of course, casting, you know, it's just like with Relentless Wrath. Yeah, having more in play is great, but I really want to look at what are those cards that are going to give me some nice advantage to having a whole bunch of cards in my deck that have the same name, and there are quite a few out there. You can do some really neat things here for sure. And I know there's going to be people out there doing it, just like they did with Dragon's Approach when that came out, right? A whole bunch of people out there have Dragon's Approach decks in Commander, and the same is going to be true for Slime Against Humanity, without a doubt. All right, couple more cards here. Suppressor Skyguard is, I think, the only card I will be mentioning from the actual Clue edition box set, whatever it is. They made, you know, a Clue IP version, and I think that it is a separate game unto itself, you know, where they have different interactions there and all that kind of stuff. Nevertheless, we can still play these cards in the Commander format. I didn't find a lot of them to be particularly good. This one for sure was the most interesting. 2 white, blue, Human Knight 2/4 with flying. And the wording here is confusing, so bear with me here. Whenever a player attacks you, if that player has another opponent who isn't being attacked, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this combat. And I had to read this over a couple of times because I was like, huh, what? So whenever a player attacks you, right, this is going to trigger whenever you get attacked. If that player has another opponent who isn't being attacked, a little bit of a confusing wording there, prevent all combat damage that we've dealt to you this combat. The simplified way of saying this is if you're the only person getting attacked, damage is prevented. That's what's happening here. Pretty great effect in a lot of Commander games for sure. Where exactly does it fit again? I guess the Pillow Fort decks. Other than that, though, just a pretty good card. All right, the last card I'm going to talk about today is my favorite card from this set. And again, this is a card that I'm not putting in any of my decks. I just think it's a really neat card, and this is the kind of cards that I love to see. I mean, this wasn't printed specifically for the Commander set, but it is a fantastic fit in Commander, and not in every deck. This is the kind of cards I want. When I see a new set come out, the cards I want are not the cards that are slam dunks in every Commander deck that everybody wants to play. It's okay to have a couple of those. I want to see cards like this, and I guess a lot of the cards I mentioned on this list would fall into that category. They're niche. They're very specific, but because they're doing something very unique and interesting, there are specific decks they're going to want to for sure play them, and they're also a card that is so unique and interesting that you could almost build an entire deck around it. Wow, am I ever pumping this card up a lot? What is it doing? So Coveted Falcon, 1 blue, artifact creature bird, 1/4 with flying. Whenever Coveted Falcon attacks, gain control of target permanent you own, but don't control. Well, that's very interesting. And obviously there are a couple of decks where you maybe want to slot this in already. I can think of one, my Menildor deck, where I had the idea of sort of donating your creatures or exchanging creatures, and now this is a great way to get them back, but even more the case because of this other ability. So it has Disguise, 1 and a blue. New mechanic from this set that I don't believe I've talked about in this video, so it is essentially Morph, right? You're going to play this guy face down for 3 mana. Then turn him up at any time for his disguise cost. He does have ward 2 while he's face down. 1 in a blue, and you turn him face up. And when you do, target opponent gains control of any number of target permanents you control, and you draw a card for each one they gain control of this way. What a super interesting card, and that's why I love cards like this. There's so many neat, interesting, niche ways to use cards like this, okay? Now, first of all, obviously it goes in a Zedru deck. That's where it's a slam dunk. It's an absolute auto-include. It's a great way to just donate a bunch of stuff to your opponents, and then also you get the card draw as well, and you can slowly start regaining control of stuff. You can just play this guy face up and don't donate nothing because you just want to be regaining control of stuff. What's that white-blue commander that exchanges control of stuff? That would probably be another deck where this is a slam dunk because whatever I'm giving to my opponents, now I can just steal it back immediately, right? You probably don't even need to do the disguise part. You just play it as is and start attacking with it to regain control of stuff. I will point out, you can just use this to regain control of stuff that was stolen from you. If you got a buddy who likes to play, I steal all your stuff, right? They like blatant thievery. They play that card all the time, or expropriate any of those cards where they can steal your commander. Okay, go nuts. I'll just attack with this and regain control of the thing that you just stole. So you can use this as a brand type of effect as well. So there is a lot of non-niche ways to use this card. There also is the I donate nasty stuff to my opponents, right? I just have a Psychic Vortex or something like that, right? One of those nasty cards that people do tend to play in their Zedru decks. I donate that to my opponent, right? My opponent skips their draw step. Any of those cards that just have those nasty effects, this is a way you can donate those cards to somebody, right? It is target opponent gains control of any number of permanents, so you can't give a whole bunch of stuff to a whole bunch of different people. You can flip this guy over if you want to do it again. Again, this is a card that you could build an entire deck around. That's why I love it so much. It is super interesting. Slam dunk in a couple of commander decks for sure, but a lot of other really niche ways to use it. I love this card a lot. All right, there you go. That is, I don't know, 25 more cards or something from Ravnica Murders at Karlov Manor. I've talked about a ton of cards from this set. It's been a while since I've talked about this many cards from a set, especially considering the main set isn't actually a commander set. There's a lot of great includes here for the commander format. You guys let me know which cards you're going to be using here in your commander decks and what your favorite cards are from this set in the comments below. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.